Get your hands off him. The bride's scream shattered the ballroom just as Amara Johnson grabbed Kong Min-jae by the collar and kissed him in front of 400 horrified guests. Crystal glasses froze halfway to painted lips. A violinist stopped mid-note. Somewhere beneath the massive gold chandelier, a champagne flute slipped from someone's hand and exploded across the black marble floor like shattered ice. For one impossible second, the entire wedding stood perfectly still. Then chaos erupted. Mafia bodyguards in black tailored suits reached beneath their jackets instantly. Guests gasped in horror. Cameras flashed wildly across the ballroom as political elites, luxury investors, and Seoul socialites stared at the shocking scene unfolding beside the wedding altar. The bride, Han Seo-yeon, looked seconds away from collapsing under the weight of humiliation burning across her pale face. Her diamond necklace trembled against her throat as she pointed toward Amara with shaking fingers. "That maid just kissed my fiancé," she screamed. But Amara barely heard her. Her heart slammed violently against her ribs while she held Kong Min-jae tightly for one more second beneath the golden chandelier light. The powerful Korean mafia boss remained completely motionless in her arms, more stunned than angry, his cold dark eyes locked onto hers with dangerous confusion. Up close, she could smell expensive cologne, aged whiskey, and the faint trace of blood orange from the champagne he almost drank. Almost. The ballroom smelled of orchids, perfume, and expensive lies. Amara finally pulled away slowly, breathing hard. Around her, the luxury wedding hall looked like something pulled from a billionaire fantasy. Black marble floors reflected crystal rain chandeliers hanging 3 stories above the guests. Gold orchids lined the altar beside towering candle walls. Men worth billions stood frozen beside Korean politicians and celebrities while a string quartet remained trapped in terrified silence near the ballroom entrance. And standing in the center of it all was Amara Johnson. The black maid nobody was supposed to notice. She had spent the last 11 months working quietly inside the Min-jae estate, cleaning wine stains no one else touched, serving tea during meetings she pretended not to hear, lowering her eyes whenever wealthy guests passed by as if invisibility itself was part of the uniform. In rooms like these, maids existed somewhere between furniture and shadow. Useful. Replaceable. Ignored. But not tonight. Tonight every eye in the ballroom burned directly into her. "You insane woman," Director Choi hissed as he pushed through the crowd toward them. His expensive gray suit looked perfectly pressed despite the chaos erupting around him. "Do you understand what you just did?" Amara stepped backward instinctively. Fear twisted violently inside her chest now that the adrenaline was fading. She could already feel the judgment spreading through the ballroom around her like poison. Angry whispers. Disgusted stares. Humiliated laughter hidden behind diamond-covered hands. She looked exactly what they believed she was. A desperate servant crossing lines she should never touch. Seo-yeon suddenly walked forward and slapped Amara hard across the face. The sound echoed sharply beneath the chandeliers. Gasps rippled across the ballroom again. Amara stumbled sideways slightly but did not fight back. She simply looked toward Kong Min-jae instead. Toward the untouched champagne glass still resting near the altar table. Her breathing became shallow. Because hidden against the inside rim of that crystal glass was a tiny dissolving capsule only she had noticed seconds before the kiss. And if Kong Min-jae had taken one more sip, the most feared mafia boss in Korea would already be dying in front of his wedding guests. The ballroom exploded into terrified whispers the second Kong Min-jae picked up the champagne glass again. "Do not drink that." Amara's voice cracked through the chaos before she could stop herself. Every head turned toward her once more. Director Choi's expression darkened instantly beneath the crystal chandelier light. "Remove her," he ordered coldly. 2 security guards in black suits immediately moved toward Amara through the crowd of horrified wedding guests. Seo-yeon stood beside the altar trembling with fury, mascara shining faintly beneath her eyes while expensive diamonds sparkled against her pale skin like frozen stars. "She ruined my wedding," the bride whispered in disbelief. In front of everyone. But Kong Min-jae still had not spoken. The feared Mafia boss stood perfectly still beside the champagne tower, one hand holding the crystal glass loosely while his unreadable dark eyes remained fixed on Amara. Around him, Seoul's elite waited nervously for his reaction. Politicians. Investors. Crime syndicate captains. Men who built empires around fear and loyalty. Yet none of them dared move until Min-jae decided what happened next. The ballroom smelled of orchids, expensive perfume, and panic. Amara's breathing turned shallow as the guards grabbed her arms roughly enough to force her backward across the marble floor. Her pulse pounded violently inside her ears. She should have stayed invisible. That was the rule for people like her. Invisible workers survived. Loud workers disappeared. But she could still see the tiny purple stain dissolving along the inside rim of the champagne glass in Min-jae's hand. She recognized it immediately because 5 years earlier, her younger brother died after accidentally swallowing a synthetic nightclub poison hidden inside a drink at a party in Atlanta. The color stayed burned into her memory forever. Purple around the glass. Bitter almond scent beneath the alcohol. Delayed collapse after ingestion. Nobody in the ballroom noticed it tonight except her. Please, Amara said desperately while struggling against the guards. Look at the glass. Director Choi stepped forward quickly before anyone else could react. She is unstable, he announced calmly to the guests. One of the temporary service workers. Temporary. Disposable. The word sliced through Amara harder than the slap. Seo-yeon suddenly pointed toward her with shaking anger. She kissed him, the bride hissed. Have her arrested. Several guests nodded immediately, eager to align themselves with power again now that the initial shock was fading. Wealthy people recovered quickly whenever someone weaker became the target. Amara looked toward Kang Min-jae one last time, desperation flooding through her chest. The Mafia boss remained terrifyingly calm beneath the ballroom lights, his black tuxedo untouched despite the chaos around him. But something in his expression had shifted slightly. Curiosity. He slowly raised the champagne glass closer toward his face instead of drinking it. Then he paused. His eyes narrowed almost invisibly. Because beneath the expensive champagne fragrance, another scent lingered faintly underneath. Bitter almond. Director Choi noticed the hesitation immediately. Sir, he interrupted quickly, stepping forward with controlled urgency, the guests are watching. Min-jae ignored him completely. The ballroom fell silent again as the Mafia boss studied the crystal rim carefully beneath the chandelier light. And then everyone saw it at the same time. A tiny purple streak melting slowly against the edge of the glass. Seo-yeon's face drained of color instantly. One of the older crime captains near the altar quietly cursed beneath his breath. The guards holding Amara loosened their grip without realizing it. Min-jae slowly lowered the glass. His expression did not change. Somehow that made the room even more frightening. Lock the ballroom doors, he said softly. No one moved for half a second. Then panic spread across the wedding hall like fire beneath silk. Because the most feared Mafia boss in Korea had just realized someone tried to poison him on his wedding night. The ballroom doors slammed shut with heavy metallic force, sealing 400 terrified guests inside the luxury wedding hall. Panic spread instantly beneath the crystal chandeliers. Wealthy investors whispered into trembling phones that no longer had signal. Politicians exchanged nervous glances across candlelit tables covered in untouched champagne. Even the violinists near the stage lowered their instruments slowly, too frightened to move. Kang Min-jae stood motionless at the center of it all with the poisoned glass still in his hand. His calmness terrified people more than shouting ever could. The feared Mafia boss did not raise his voice. He did not panic. He simply looked at the dissolving purple stain along the crystal rim while silence tightened around the ballroom like a noose. Nobody leaves, he said quietly. The command echoed through the massive hall instantly. Black-suited guards moved toward every exit with disciplined precision while guests shrank back beneath the tension swallowing the room. Seo-yeon's breathing became visibly uneven beside the altar. Her white designer wedding gown shimmered beneath the chandelier lights like fresh snow, but the elegance no longer hid the fear spreading across her face. Director Choi stepped carefully toward Kang Min-jae with controlled calmness. Too controlled. Amara noticed immediately. "Sir," Choi said smoothly, "we should move you to a secure location." Min-jae slowly lifted his eyes toward him. "And leave the poisoner behind?" The question landed softly, but several guests visibly flinched. Choi bowed his head slightly. "Your safety comes first." Amara stood near the ballroom wall now, rubbing her aching wrist where the guards grabbed her earlier. Nobody looked at her the same way anymore. The invisible maid had suddenly become the center of the most dangerous room in Seoul. She could feel the eyes on her constantly now. Suspicion. Curiosity. Fear. One older woman covered in diamonds whispered something cruel beneath her breath while staring at Amara's dark skin and simple black service uniform. Another guest avoided looking at her entirely, as though acknowledging her existence made the situation more real. Wealthy people always needed someone lower than themselves to blame when fear entered the room. But Kang Min-jae still had not stopped watching her. "How did you know?" he finally asked. The ballroom quieted immediately again. Amara swallowed hard beneath the pressure of hundreds of eyes. "The smell," she answered softly. "And the color." Choi interrupted instantly. Anyone could invent that after the fact. Amara looked toward him carefully. His expensive gray suit remained perfect despite the chaos around him. Not a single bead of sweat. Not a wrinkle. Too composed. "Then drink it," she said quietly. Several guests gasped aloud. Director Choi's expression tightened almost invisibly for half a second. But Kang Min-jae noticed. He noticed everything. The Mafia boss slowly extended the poisoned champagne glass toward Choi without speaking. The ballroom froze again. Choi stared at the crystal glass in silence. "Sir," he said carefully, with respect, "this is absurd." Min-jae's dark eyes never blinked. "Drink it." The command was colder this time. Final. Around them, tension spread beneath the chandeliers like ice cracking across black water. Seoul suddenly stepped forward too quickly. "This has gone far enough," she snapped. "That woman already humiliated me in front of everyone." Amara looked toward the bride and felt something twist sharply in her chest. Because earlier tonight, just seconds before the ceremony began, she noticed something strange. Seoul never touched her own champagne glass once. Not once. Even while smiling for photographs. Even during the toast. At the time, Amara thought it was nerves. Now she was no longer sure. Min-jae slowly lowered the poisoned glass without breaking eye contact with his bride. "Interesting," he murmured quietly. The ballroom became so silent that guests could hear the rain beginning outside against the towering hotel windows. And standing beneath the crystal chandelier light, Amara suddenly realized something terrifying. The poison was never meant to leave the ballroom alive. Rain hammered softly against the towering ballroom windows while fear spread through the wedding guests like smoke beneath the chandeliers. Nobody touched the champagne anymore. Crystal glasses sat abandoned across white linen tables beside melting candle wax and untouched lobster plates worth more than most people's monthly rent. Seoul's elite suddenly looked painfully human beneath the luxury. Nervous hands. Trembling eyes. Expensive people discovering money could not protect them from poison. Kang Min-jae slowly placed the contaminated champagne glass onto the altar table with controlled precision. The tiny purple streak still glimmered against the crystal rim beneath the ballroom lights. Director Choi stood directly across from him now, shoulders perfectly straight, expression carefully calm. Too calm. Min-jae noticed details most people missed. A tightening jaw. Controlled. Breathing. The faint pulse visible beneath Choi's collar. Fear disguised as discipline. Seoul stepped closer toward Min-jae carefully, the long white train of her designer gown sliding across the black marble floor behind her like spilled silk. Min-jae, she whispered softly, this woman already caused enough damage tonight. Her voice sounded fragile now instead of furious. Vulnerable. But Amara noticed something strange again. Seoyeon never once looked at the poisoned glass directly. She kept staring at Amara instead. As if the maid herself mattered more than the poison. Damage? Min-jae repeated quietly. The single word made the ballroom colder. Several guests lowered their eyes immediately. The Mafia boss turned slowly toward Amara standing near the ballroom wall beneath the grip of two guards. A faint red mark still burned across her cheek where Seoyeon slapped her earlier. Her black service uniform looked painfully plain beneath all the diamonds and tailored tuxedos surrounding her. Yet somehow she was now the only honest thing left inside the room. Bring her here, Min-jae ordered. The guards hesitated briefly before releasing Amara at once. She rubbed her wrists quietly while walking toward the altar beneath hundreds of staring eyes. The ballroom felt impossibly large now. Endless crystal light. Endless judgment. Endless silence. Every step echoed across the marble floor. Director Choi watched her approach with an expression that had finally begun cracking beneath the pressure. Sir, he interrupted sharply, with respect, trusting a servant over your own people is dangerous. Min-jae looked toward him slowly. My own people just tried to poison me. The sentence landed like ice water across the ballroom. Nobody breathed. Seoyeon suddenly reached for Min-jae's arm. Please, she whispered, we can discuss this privately. Min-jae gently pulled his arm away without looking at her. That small movement hurt her more visibly than the public humiliation earlier. Amara noticed it immediately. Around them, bodyguards shifted positions near the exits while rain continued streaking across the dark Seoul skyline outside the hotel windows. The luxury ballroom no longer felt like a wedding. It felt like a courtroom moments before judgment. Min-jae turned toward Amara again. Tell me exactly what you saw. Her throat tightened. This was the moment invisible workers feared most. Speaking too much inside powerful rooms could destroy lives. But staying silent tonight could have destroyed his. The champagne tray arrived 20 minutes before the ceremony, she said carefully. I was replacing candles near the orchestra when I noticed one glass already had lipstick on it. Seoyeon's face tightened instantly. That proves nothing. Amara nodded softly. No. But then I noticed something else. The ballroom leaned into silence around her. You never drank from your own glass all night. Seoyeon froze completely. Director Choi immediately stepped forward again. This is ridiculous speculation from a maid desperate for attention. Amara looked directly at him now. Then why did you switch the trays after the first toast? For the first time all night, Director Choi lost control of his expression. Just for 1 second. But Kang Min-jae saw it. And in worlds built on fear and betrayal, 1 second was all it took to destroy trust forever. The ballroom became so quiet that the soft crackling of candle flames sounded unnaturally loud beneath the chandeliers. Director Choi stared at Amara with an expression that finally revealed something real beneath his polished calmness. Hatred. Pure and immediate. Around them, the wealthy guests shifted nervously beside tables covered in melting ice sculptures and untouched wedding cakes while rain continued sliding down the giant hotel windows overlooking Seoul. Nobody expected the maid to speak again. Especially not like this. Careful, Choi said softly, his voice dangerously controlled now. False accusations inside this room carry consequences. Amara felt fear tighten through her chest instantly. Men like Director Choi did not make empty threats. She had worked inside the Min-jae estate long enough to understand how power operated around people like him. Quietly. Elegantly. Permanently. But Kang Min-jae remained perfectly still beside the altar, watching both of them with cold, unreadable eyes. The Mafia boss looked less like a groom now and more like what he truly was beneath the luxury wedding suit. A man who survived by studying betrayal before it reached him. Continue, Min-jae said calmly. Amara swallowed hard. Every instinct inside her begged her to stop talking. Invisible worker survived longer. But she had already crossed the line the moment she grabbed him beneath the chandelier lights. There was no returning to invisibility anymore. After the first toast, she explained carefully, the original champagne tray disappeared for about 2 minutes. Several guests exchanged uneasy glances. One older politician quietly lowered his wine glass onto the table without drinking. Amara looked directly at Director Choi again. "You brought it back yourself." Choi laughed softly, but the sound carried no warmth. "I manage security for one of the most powerful organizations in Korea. Moving trays during an event proves nothing." "No," Amara agreed quietly. "But changing one glass does." Seo-yeon suddenly stepped forward before Choi could respond. "Enough." Her voice cracked sharply beneath the ballroom silence. Tears shimmered across her carefully painted eyes now, but something about them felt wrong to Amara. Too controlled. Too delayed. "This woman is trying to destroy my wedding because she is obsessed with him," Seo-yeon whispered. A ripple of whispers spread instantly through the guests. The accusation landed exactly where Seo-yeon wanted it to. The jealous maid. The desperate servant. The outsider crossing boundaries above her station. Wealthy rooms always preferred ugly explanations over uncomfortable truths. Amara felt humiliation burn through her cheeks immediately. Several women in designer gowns looked at her with open disgust now. One man quietly muttered something about attention-seeking staff. The shift happened fast. Fear inside the ballroom suddenly had a new target. Her. But Kang Min-jae still did not react emotionally. That frightened people more than anger would have. He slowly turned toward Seo-yeon instead. "Obsessed?" he repeated softly. The bride straightened carefully. "She watches you constantly at the estate." Seo-yeon continued quickly. "Everyone has noticed it." Amara's stomach dropped. Lies spoken confidently inside luxury rooms often became truth before anyone questioned them. She looked toward Min-jae desperately, but his expression remained unreadable beneath the chandelier light. Then the Mafia boss asked a question no one expected. "If she wanted my attention," he said quietly, "why save my life?" Silence crashed across the ballroom again. Seo-yeon froze. Director Choi immediately stepped forward once more. "Sir, this is emotional manipulation. She poisoned the glass herself, then created this spectacle to appear heroic." Several guests visibly relaxed hearing that explanation. It sounded cleaner. Safer. Easier for powerful people to accept. Blame the maid. Restore order. Continue the wedding. But Amara noticed something terrifying then. Choi was subtly moving closer toward the ballroom side exit while speaking. Slowly. Carefully. Like a man preparing to disappear. Kang Min-jae noticed too. The Mafia boss tilted his head slightly toward one of his guards without taking his eyes off Choi. "Search the security office," he said softly. Choi's face lost color instantly. And in that exact moment, everyone inside the ballroom finally understood the same horrifying truth at once. The maid had not interrupted an assassination. She had interrupted a conspiracy already falling apart. The ballroom doors remained sealed while rain battered the hotel windows hard enough to blur the Seoul skyline into rivers of gold and black. Inside, fear moved quietly now. No more screaming. No more public outrage. Just silence heavy enough to suffocate everyone beneath the chandeliers. Kang Min-jae stood near the altar with one hand resting lightly against the poisoned champagne glass while his guards disappeared toward the security offices upstairs. Nobody dared speak louder than a whisper anymore. Even the orchestra remained frozen beside their instruments like statues trapped inside the nightmare unfolding around them. Director Choi slowly adjusted the sleeve of his expensive gray suit, but the gesture no longer looked confident. It looked calculated. A man buying himself seconds. "Sir," he said carefully, "you are allowing panic to cloud your judgment." Min-jae finally looked toward him directly again. His dark eyes carried the terrifying stillness of someone no longer deciding whether betrayal existed, but deciding how deep it reached. "Am I?" he asked softly. Choi bowed his head slightly. This Maid manipulated the situation perfectly. Public sympathy. Public heroism. Everything about this feels staged. Several guests nodded subtly again, desperate to believe the cleaner explanation. The maid as liar. The servant as opportunist. It fit the ballroom more comfortably than the truth. Wealthy people trusted hierarchy more than evidence. Amara felt the judgment shifting back toward her immediately. The humiliation returned fast beneath the designer stares and whispered assumptions. She looked down at her plain black service shoes against the polished marble floor and suddenly felt exhausted. Not physically. Spiritually. She spent her entire life learning how quickly rooms changed once people like her became inconvenient. Seoul stepped closer beside Choi now, her white wedding gown glowing beneath candlelight like fragile porcelain. "Min-jae," she whispered softly, "please end this." Her voice trembled perfectly. Too perfectly. Amara noticed something else then. Seoul kept touching the diamond bracelet around her wrist over and over again. Nervous repetition. Almost subconscious. And suddenly Amara remembered seeing Director Choi speaking privately with Seoul near the ballroom entrance before the ceremony started. At the time, she ignored it. Rich people always whispered around servants like they were invisible air. But now the memory returned sharply. Seoul looked frightened then too. Not nervous. Frightened. Before Amara could think further, the ballroom elevator doors opened. Two guards emerged immediately with hard expressions. Behind them walked Min-jae's head of internal security carrying a black tablet computer in one hand. The atmosphere inside the ballroom shifted instantly. Director Choi noticed it first. "Sir," the security chief said quietly, "you need to see this." He handed the tablet toward Min-jae without another word. Guests strained silently to read the Mafia boss's expression while rain continued hammering outside the glass walls. Min-jae studied the screen for several long seconds. His face revealed nothing at first. Then something changed. Not anger. Worse. Disappointment. Deep enough to feel personal. Slowly, he lifted his eyes toward Director Choi. "You deleted 43 minutes of ballroom surveillance footage tonight." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Choi immediately straightened. "That is impossible. The backup servers disagree." Min-jae's voice remained calm, but the ballroom somehow became colder. Seoul face lost color beside him. Several guests quietly stepped farther away from Choi now without even realizing they were doing it. Fear always reorganized rooms faster than loyalty. Choi forced out a sharp laugh. "Deleted footage proves nothing." Min-jae tilted the tablet slightly. "No," he agreed softly. "But transferring $6 million into an offshore account 3 hours before my wedding does." The ballroom erupted into stunned whispers instantly. Seoul staggered backward slightly as if the floor itself shifted beneath her heels. Amara stared at Director Choi in disbelief while his carefully controlled mask finally cracked apart completely for the first time all night. Sweat glimmered faintly near his collar beneath the chandelier light. And in that exact moment, Kang Min-jae stopped looking at him like an employee. He started looking at him like a traitor. Director Choi's composure collapsed slowly beneath the chandelier light. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just enough for everyone inside the ballroom to see the truth bleeding through the cracks. The tiny tremor in his hand. The pulse beating too fast beneath his collar. The careful breathing of a man realizing the room no longer belonged to him. Kang Min-jae stood motionless near the altar holding the tablet computer while rain streaked endlessly across the giant hotel windows behind him. Seoul glittered outside in rivers of neon and silver, but inside the ballroom, nobody cared about beauty anymore. Fear had swallowed everything. $6 million, Min-jae repeated softly. "That is expensive loyalty." Director Choi straightened immediately. You believe fabricated banking records over the man who protected you for 12 years? The Mafia boss slowly looked up from the screen. You protected my empire, he corrected calmly. Not me. The distinction changed the entire room. Several older crime captains exchanged quiet glances near the champagne tower. They understood immediately what Min-jae truly meant. Protection motivated by money ended the moment money disappeared. Real loyalty survived without profit. And tonight, someone in this ballroom sold his life for a transfer wire. Seo-yeon suddenly stepped backward again, one hand gripping her diamond bracelet tightly enough to leave pale marks across her wrist. Amara noticed her breathing becoming more uneven now. Not grief. Panic. The bride looked trapped between terror and calculation. Like someone trying desperately to predict which side would survive the night. Min-jae, Seo-yeon whispered carefully, please listen to me. He turned toward her slowly. The ballroom became silent enough to hear rainwater sliding down the glass walls outside. I am listening. Seo-yeon's lips parted slightly, but no words came out immediately. For the first time all night, the elegant billionaire bride looked genuinely afraid. Amara watched her closely and suddenly understood something uncomfortable. Seo-yeon might not have planned the poisoning herself. But she knew something was wrong before the ceremony started. That fear near the ballroom entrance earlier had been real. Director Choi noticed Seo-yeon wavering instantly. Careful, he said sharply. The single word cut across the ballroom like a blade. Every head turned toward him again. Min-jae's eyes narrowed slightly. Interesting, he murmured. You sound nervous. Choi laughed once, but the sound came out hollow now. I sound betrayed. Then his expression shifted toward Amara with cold disgust. All of this because a maid wanted attention. The sentence hit the ballroom exactly the way he intended. Several guests visibly relaxed hearing her reduced again. The maid. The outsider. The easiest target in the room. Amara felt humiliation rise hot across her face instantly. She looked down at her simple black uniform surrounded by diamonds, silk gowns, and tailored tuxedos worth more than her yearly salary. She did not belong here. She never had. But before the shame could fully swallow her, Kang Min-jae spoke again. Look at her. The room froze. Min-jae stepped slowly toward Amara beneath the chandelier light. She has been slapped, accused, humiliated, threatened, and treated like dirt all night. His voice remained calm. Controlled. Dangerous in its quietness. Yet she is still the only person in this ballroom who tried to save my life before saving herself. Nobody answered him. Nobody could. Amara felt her chest tighten unexpectedly as Min-jae stopped directly in front of her. Up close, the feared Mafia boss looked exhausted now beneath the expensive tuxedo and luxury surroundings. Not weak. Just painfully aware. Why? He asked quietly. The question stunned her more than the accusations earlier. Why risk yourself for me? Amara looked into his dark eyes for a long moment while rain shimmered against the windows behind him. Then she answered honestly. Because everyone else was too busy protecting power to notice danger. The ballroom fell silent again. And somewhere near the back tables, one of the older Mafia captains slowly lowered his head with something that looked almost like shame. No one in the ballroom moved after Amara answered him. The words settled heavily beneath the crystal chandeliers while rain continued sliding down the towering hotel windows overlooking Seoul. Kang Min-jae stood directly in front of her now, close enough for her to see the exhaustion hiding beneath his perfectly controlled expression. Around them, hundreds of wealthy guests remained trapped inside absolute silence. The orchestra still had not resumed playing. Candle flames flickered softly against gold-trimmed walls and polished black marble floors while fear quietly rearranged every relationship inside the room. Director Choi was no longer standing near the center of power. He was standing alone. And everyone could feel it. Seo-yeon lowered herself slowly into one of the velvet chairs. Beside the altar as though her legs no longer trusted the floor beneath her. Her white wedding gown spilled around her like broken silk while mascara shimmered faintly beneath her eyes. She looked less like a bride now and more like someone watching her future collapse in real time. Min-jae finally turned away from Amara and looked toward Choi again. 12 years, he said softly. You sat beside me at every negotiation. Every expansion. Every funeral. Choi forced himself to remain calm beneath the ballroom lights. And because of that history, you should know I would never betray you. Min-jae tilted his head slightly. Then why delete the footage? Choi's jaw tightened instantly. Because I was protecting this family from scandal. The answer came too quickly. Too rehearsed. Several older syndicate members exchanged dark looks near the ballroom entrance. They understood the danger now. Not simply attempted murder. Internal betrayal. Inside organizations built on loyalty, that kind of poison spread faster than bullets. Amara quietly stepped backward toward the ballroom wall again, hoping to disappear now that attention had shifted away from her. But before she could retreat fully, Min-jae spoke without looking at her. Stay. The single word stopped her instantly. Guests noticed it too. The maid who had spent months invisible inside the estate was suddenly the one person the Mafia boss trusted enough to keep close. That realization changed the room all over again. Choi noticed it with growing desperation. Sir, he said sharply, you are allowing emotion to cloud your judgment because she saved you publicly. Min-jae slowly looked toward him. No, he answered calmly. I am judging you because she did. The sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. Seo-yeon covered her mouth briefly as if the emotional weight inside the ballroom had become unbearable. Amara watched her carefully again and saw something unexpected this time. Regret. Genuine regret. Not for the wedding. For staying silent. Before anyone could speak further, one of the guards near the ballroom entrance suddenly approached Min-jae carrying a small transparent evidence bag. Inside rested a tiny dissolving capsule identical to the residue found inside the champagne glass. Recovered from the service corridor trash bin, the guard announced quietly. The ballroom erupted into terrified whispers immediately. Choi's face drained of color. Min-jae accepted the evidence bag slowly without taking his eyes off him. You were very close, the Mafia boss said softly. Choi's composure finally shattered. You think your enemies stop existing because you wear a tuxedo and throw a wedding? He snapped suddenly. Several guests gasped aloud. You built your empire on fear, Min-jae. Tonight was simply business. The confession changed the atmosphere instantly. Not loud panic this time. Something colder. Final. The ballroom no longer felt like a luxury wedding hall. It felt like the last moments before a kingdom reorganized itself. Min-jae studied Choi silently for several seconds while rain thundered harder against the windows outside. Then he handed the evidence bag calmly to one of his guards. Escort Director Choi out of my sight. Nobody moved immediately. Even the guards looked nervous now. Because everyone inside the ballroom understood the terrifying truth beneath the command. Director Choi was no longer protected by power. And in worlds like Min-jae's, losing protection was often worse than losing freedom. Director Choi did not resist when the guards approached him. That frightened the ballroom more than panic would have. The disgraced security director simply adjusted his cufflinks slowly beneath the chandelier light while 4 armed guards surrounded him near the altar. Rain continued hammering the giant hotel windows hard enough to shake faint reflections across the black marble floor. Seoul glittered outside like a city pretending evil only existed in movies. Inside the ballroom, everyone knew better now. Kang Min-jae stood perfectly still watching Choi with unreadable dark eyes while guests remained frozen beside untouched wedding tables and dying candlelight. Nobody wanted to become visible anymore. Not in rooms where loyalty collapsed this quickly. You made one mistake tonight, Min-jae said calmly. Choi smiled faintly. Trusting me? Underestimating her. His eyes shifted briefly toward Amara. The entire ballroom followed his gaze instantly. She felt the attention hit her again like heat beneath the luxury lights. Earlier tonight they looked at her with disgust. Then suspicion. Now something else had entered their expressions entirely. Unease. Respect frightened wealthy people almost as much as truth did when it came from someone beneath them. Amara lowered her eyes instinctively, uncomfortable beneath the sudden shift in power surrounding her. She still wore the same plain black Maid uniform. The same simple shoes. Yet somehow the room itself had changed around her. Seoyeon slowly stood from the velvet chair near the altar while holding the edge of her white gown carefully against the marble floor. Tears had streaked faintly through her makeup now, softening the perfection she spent years constructing. She looked toward Min-jae with visible desperation. "I did not know he planned to poison you," she whispered. The ballroom tightened instantly around the sentence. Choi's jaw flexed sharply beside the guards. Min-jae looked at her without expression. "But you knew something." Seoyeon's silence answered before her words did. Rainwater slid slowly down the ballroom glass behind them while thunder rolled faintly across the distant skyline. "My father arranged this marriage," Seoyeon admitted quietly. Choi approached him months ago about restructuring power after the wedding. Several guests exchanged alarmed looks immediately. Political alliances. Financial mergers. Syndicate influence. Suddenly the luxury wedding no longer looked romantic at all. It looked strategic. Seoyeon's voice trembled harder now. "I thought they only wanted control over your organization." Min-jae remained frighteningly calm. "And you still walked down the aisle." The sentence hurt her visibly. Amara watched Seoyeon carefully and saw genuine shame settle across the bride's face for the first time all night. Not shame over public humiliation. Shame over cowardice. Choi suddenly laughed softly beside the guards. "You speak about loyalty while building your empire through fear," he said coldly toward Min-jae. "Do you know why everyone betrays you eventually?" Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Choi's eyes darkened. "Because fear keeps people obedient. It never keeps them loyal." The words echoed heavily through the ballroom. Even Min-jae seemed to absorb them differently than the accusations earlier. Quietly. Personally. Amara looked toward him then and noticed something unexpected beneath his controlled expression. Exhaustion. The kind carried by powerful men who spent too many years surrounded by people pretending devotion while secretly calculating survival. One of the older syndicate captains near the back table suddenly lowered his head respectfully toward Amara. Then another followed. Small gestures. Quiet acknowledgements. But inside organizations built on hierarchy, those gestures meant everything. The invisible maid had become the woman who saw danger before everyone else in the room. Min-jae finally stepped toward Choi one last time. "Remove him from the hotel," he said calmly to the guards. "The authorities can question him after sunrise." Choi's expression darkened immediately. He understood what the wording truly meant. Not revenge. Disgrace. Public exposure. Permanent loss of influence. In worlds built on reputation, humiliation lasted longer than fear. As the guards escorted Choi toward the ballroom exit, he looked back once toward Amara with cold disbelief still lingering in his eyes. Like he could not accept that his downfall began because one maid refused to stay silent. And standing beneath the dying candlelight beside shattered champagne glasses and abandoned wedding flowers, Amara suddenly realized the night had changed far more than a wedding. It had changed who the most powerful man in the room trusted. The ballroom slowly emptied after midnight, but nobody left with the same expression they arrived wearing. Wealthy guests who entered expecting champagne, political alliances, and luxury wedding photographs now walked silently beneath the crystal chandeliers like survivors escaping a ship after hidden fire. Expensive heels clicked softly across black marble floors covered in shattered glass and abandoned flower petals while security teams quietly escorted influential guests toward private elevators. Nobody spoke loudly anymore. Not after watching betrayal unfold inches from the altar. Rain still covered the towering hotel windows, turning Seoul into blurred rivers of neon beneath the storm clouds outside. Kang Min-jae remained near the center of the ballroom long after most guests disappeared. His black tuxedo jacket rested unbuttoned now, exposing the exhaustion beneath the elegance for the first time all night. Several syndicate captains stood nearby waiting for instructions, but none interrupted him. The atmosphere around Min-jae had changed completely since earlier that evening. Before the wedding, people feared his power. Now they feared his clarity. Seo-yeon sat alone beside the collapsed champagne tower while attendants quietly gathered the train of her expensive wedding gown from the floor around her. Her makeup had faded beneath hours of tears and stress, leaving behind someone far younger and more fragile than the polished billionaire heiress who walked into the ballroom earlier. She looked toward Min-jae several times like she wanted to speak, but the words never arrived. Some silences became too large for apologies. Near the far wall, Amara quietly folded linen napkins into a service cart because she did not know what else to do with her hands. Survival habits remained stronger than shock. The ballroom staff avoided looking directly at her now. Earlier they pitied her. Then feared for her. Now uncertainty lingered between them. One young waitress whispered softly while passing by. "You saved him." Amara lowered her eyes immediately. "I just noticed something." But even she no longer fully believed that explanation. Across the ballroom, Kang Min-jae finally walked toward her through the fading candlelight. Conversation stopped automatically wherever he moved. The Mafia boss carried silence around him the way kings carried crowns. Amara instinctively straightened beside the service cart as he approached. Up close, he looked different now. Less untouchable. The dangerous coldness remained in his dark eyes, but tonight something heavier existed beneath it. Betrayal always aged powerful men faster than time. "You are still working," he said quietly. Amara glanced down at the folded linens in her hands. "It is what I know how to do." The honesty of the answer seemed to affect him more than she expected. Min-jae looked around the destroyed ballroom slowly. Broken crystal. Half-melted candles. Wilted orchids. A wedding transformed into evidence. "Do you know what most people would have done tonight?" he asked softly. Amara shook her head. "Protected themselves first." His eyes settled on her again. "You did not." She looked away uncomfortably beneath the intensity of his attention. "I lost my brother because nobody warned him in time," she admitted quietly. "I could not watch that happen again." For the first time all night, genuine emotion flickered openly across Kang Min-jae's face. Not anger. Not suspicion. Pain. How old was he? 19. Silence settled gently between them while rain slid down the windows behind the ballroom. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly above Seoul. Min-jae glanced toward the abandoned wedding altar one final time before speaking again. "You are no longer staff here." The sentence startled her completely. Fear immediately tightened through her chest. "Sir, if this is because of tonight, I can leave quietly." "I never meant to create problems." Min-jae interrupted softly. "That is not what I meant." Amara looked up slowly. The Mafia boss studied her carefully beneath the dying chandelier light. "People spend years proving whether they deserve trust," he said quietly. "You did it in one night." And standing inside the ruins of a wedding built on lies, Amara suddenly realized her life had changed in a way that could never be undone. By sunrise, the storm above Seoul had finally disappeared. Pale morning light spilled across the city skyline and reflected against the glass towers surrounding the Han River while the luxury hotel remained unnaturally quiet after the chaos of the night before. News of the cancelled wedding had not reached the public yet. Inside powerful circles, scandals moved carefully before they moved loudly. The ballroom itself looked almost unrecognizable now. Workers replaced shattered crystal. Wilted orchids disappeared into black trash bags. The massive gold chandelier still glowed above polished marble floors, but the warmth from earlier celebrations had vanished completely. It no longer felt like a place built for romance. It felt like a room that survived betrayal. Amara stood alone near the service entrance wearing plain clothes for the first time in nearly a year. A dark coat. Simple jeans. One small overnight bag rested beside her feet. She had spent the last hour quietly cleaning out her tiny staff quarters inside the hotel because leaving still felt safer than staying. People like her survived by recognizing when rooms became too dangerous to remain inside. Last night changed everything. She understood that much. And change around powerful men rarely arrived gently. Across the ballroom, Kang Min-jae entered alone without guards or advisors surrounding him for the first time since she met him. Morning sunlight cut across his black dress shirt while exhaustion shadowed his face beneath the controlled calmness he still carried so naturally. He looked less like a mafia boss this morning and more like a man who had spent the night burying illusions. Amara immediately straightened beside her bag. "Sir," she said quietly. Min-jae glanced toward the overnight bag resting at her feet. "You are leaving." It was not a question. Amara lowered her eyes slightly. "That would be easier for everyone." Min-jae walked slowly farther into the ballroom, looking around at the dismantled wedding decorations and stripped floral arches. "Easier," he repeated softly. Interesting word. Sunlight reflected across the marble floor between them while distant traffic echoed faintly far below the hotel tower. "People like me learn that staying visible too long creates problems," Amara admitted quietly. "Especially after nights like this." Min-jae stopped near the destroyed altar platform and looked toward her carefully. "And what kind of people are those?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated before answering. "The kind nobody expects to matter." Silence settled briefly between them again. Not uncomfortable this time. Thoughtful. Min-jae slowly loosened the cuff of his black shirt while studying the empty ballroom. "Do you know what I realized last night?" he asked softly. Amara shook her head. "Everyone in this room spent years trying to prove loyalty with money, power, or fear." His dark eyes shifted toward her. "You proved it by risking humiliation." The sentence landed harder than compliments would have. Amara looked away quickly, uncomfortable beneath sincerity she did not know how to receive. Her entire life trained her to expect suspicion from powerful people, not gratitude. Min-jae walked toward one of the long ballroom windows overlooking Seoul now washed in pale gold morning light. "Seo-yeon left for Tokyo 3 hours ago," he said quietly. "Her father is negotiating damage control already." Amara nodded softly without judgment. Wealthy families survived scandals differently than ordinary people did. They reorganized them. Min-jae rested one hand lightly against the glass. Director Choi admitted everything before dawn. Amara's chest tightened slightly. "Why?" "Debt. Resentment. Ambition." He gave the faintest humorless smile. "The usual reasons men betray each other." For a moment neither of them spoke. Morning sunlight continued spreading slowly across the ballroom floor where shattered champagne glasses had been cleaned away only hours earlier. Finally Min-jae turned toward her fully again. "You said earlier that people like you learn when to leave dangerous rooms." Amara nodded once. The mafia boss studied her quietly beneath the soft morning light. "Then perhaps," he said calmly, "you should stop standing outside the room entirely." And for the first time since arriving in Seoul, Amara realized someone powerful was not looking at her like staff, charity, or scandal. He was looking at her like someone whose voice deserved to remain in the room. 3 months later, Seoul entered autumn beneath rivers of amber light and cold evening rain. The scandal surrounding Kang Min-jae's cancelled wedding had never fully reached the public the way journalists expected. Powerful families buried stories differently than ordinary people. Newspapers spoke carefully. Television anchors avoided names. Online rumors appeared and vanished overnight like smoke erased by invisible hands. But inside the upper circles of business and organized power, everyone knew exactly what happened inside the Imperial Crown Hotel ballroom. More importantly, everyone knew who prevented it. Amara Johnson no longer wore a maid uniform. The change still felt unreal some mornings. She now worked inside Min Jae's private operations office overlooking the Han River, helping review hospitality contracts, employee protection policies, and international staffing systems across properties connected to his organization. Not because she suddenly became wealthy or powerful herself, but because Kang Min-jae trusted people who noticed what others ignored. And after years surrounded by polished liars, trust had become more valuable to him than status. The office tower itself reflected old money restraint instead of flashy luxury. Dark walnut walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul. Soft jazz music drifting quietly through private conference rooms. Men in expensive suits lowered their voices whenever Min-jae entered a room. Yet something inside the organization had shifted over the past months. Employees looked security staff in the eyes more often now. Hotel workers stopped disappearing silently after complaints. Service employees received direct reporting channels bypassing corrupt supervisors entirely. Small changes. Quiet changes. But people noticed. One rainy evening, Amara stood near the office windows organizing international staffing reports while city lights shimmered across the river below like melted gold. She still sometimes caught herself waiting for someone to remind her she did not belong there. Years of invisibility did not disappear quickly. Behind her, Kang Min-jae entered the office carrying 2 paper coffee cups from the small cafe downstairs instead of sending assistants like he once would have. "You missed dinner again," he said calmly. Amara looked up in surprise. "I was finishing the Singapore files." He placed 1 coffee beside her quietly. "The files will still exist tomorrow." She smiled faintly at that. Months ago, hearing concern from someone like him would have terrified her. Now it simply felt human. Outside the windows, rain slid softly across the Seoul skyline while traffic moved far below in glowing rivers of red and white. Min-jae loosened the cuff of his black coat slightly while looking over the city. "The Employee Protection Foundation launches next week," he said. Amara blinked softly. "You actually kept the name?" He glanced toward her. "Invisible no more." A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "It still sounds dramatic." "Most important things do." The office fell into comfortable silence afterward. Not romantic. Not forced. Simply 2 people standing inside a peaceful moment neither expected life to give them. Min-jae eventually looked toward her again with quieter seriousness. "Do you regret staying?" The question lingered between them gently while rain continued tapping against the glass walls. Amara thought about the ballroom. The slap across her face. The humiliation. The fear. Then she thought about the employees now protected because someone powerful finally listened to a servant before dismissing her. "No," she answered softly. "I regret how long I believed my voice did not belong in rooms like this." Min-jae studied her carefully beneath the warm office lighting. "Most people in powerful rooms are not taught to listen," he admitted quietly. "You forced them to." The city glowed endlessly below them while autumn rain blurred the skyline into watercolor reflections against the glass. And standing beside the man whose life she once saved with one impossible decision beneath a ballroom chandelier, Amara finally understood something her younger self never believed possible. Sometimes survival was not the greatest victory. Sometimes being truly seen was. 1 year later, the Imperial Crown Hotel ballroom looked completely different beneath the winter lights of Seoul. The same crystal chandeliers still hung above polished black marble floors. Gold orchids still lined the walls beside towering windows overlooking the river. Wealthy politicians and business leaders still gathered beneath soft violin music and expensive candlelight. But the atmosphere inside the room had changed forever. Fear no longer ruled the space the way it once had. Respect did. Near the center of the ballroom stood a large silver plaque engraved with the words "Invisible No More Foundation," a global employee protection initiative now operating across hotels, corporate properties, and service industries throughout Asia and the United States. Workers who once feared retaliation for reporting abuse now had legal protection, anonymous reporting systems, emergency housing support, and direct representation independent from corrupt management. Quiet changes. Human changes. The kind powerful people once ignored because invisible workers were never supposed to become visible enough to matter. Amara Johnson stood near the ballroom windows watching snow drift softly beyond the Seoul skyline while guests quietly filled the hall around her. She wore a simple dark emerald dress tonight, elegant but understated, the kind of grace built from confidence instead of wealth. 1 year earlier she entered this ballroom carrying trays beneath lowered eyes. Tonight people crossed entire rooms just to shake her hand. Scholars. Executives. Diplomats. Journalists. Yet the strangest part was not the attention. It was how calm she finally felt inside rooms that once made her feel small. Across the ballroom, Kang Min-jae stood speaking with international investors beside the foundation display wall. The dangerous coldness people once feared around him had softened into something steadier now. Not weakness. Clarity. He still carried power the way storms carried thunder beneath clouds. But people noticed something different over the past year. He listened longer. Spoke less. Watched more carefully whenever workers entered a room. The ballroom orchestra shifted into a slower piece while snow continued falling softly outside the giant windows. Min-jae eventually crossed the ballroom toward Amara carrying 2 untouched champagne glasses. He stopped beside her near the glass skyline overlooking Seoul wrapped in winter light. Funny, he said quietly, handing her 1 glass, this room almost killed me. Amara smiled softly for the first time that evening. Now it funds employee safety seminars. He glanced toward her with the faintest trace of amusement. A dramatic improvement. They stood together in comfortable silence while guests laughed softly behind them beneath the chandeliers. Somewhere near the stage, hotel staff members posed proudly for photographs beside foundation banners instead of hiding quietly behind service doors. Min-jae noticed Amara watching them. You changed this place, he said calmly. She shook her head gently. No. People changed once someone powerful finally listened. The sentence lingered quietly between them while snow drifted across the river outside. Min-jae slowly raised his glass slightly toward her. 2 inconvenient truths. Amara lifted hers with a small smile. To people who refused to stay invisible. Crystal touched crystal softly beneath the warm ballroom lights. Around them, music drifted through the hall while workers, executives, and powerful guests stood together inside a room that once represented fear and silence. Some stories begin with luxury. Others begin with pain. But the rarest stories are the ones where dignity survives both. And somewhere inside the glowing skyline of Seoul, a woman once dismissed as invisible finally understood the truth powerful people spend entire lives learning too late. Respect is not determined by status. It is revealed by who still chooses to protect others when nobody is watching. If this story moved you, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share for more emotional stories that prove courage, dignity, and humanity still matter in this world.